Hello everyone and welcome back to my video. Today we will be creating a wreath inspired by Over the Garden Wall, one of the best fall time cartoons you can get. It's available on Hulu. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. They have this one episode where they go to this town called Pottsfield and all of the inhabitants have pumpkin heads, and so I thought that would be the perfect holiday wreath to create. Originally it was meant for Halloween, but I also keep my decorations up until Thanksgiving, so this still definitely applies. I started off with sketching some of the pumpkin heads. I've never painted with acrylic before, and I got a set off of Amazon for relatively cheap. I didn't even have all of the proper materials. Like this palette that I used was actually the tin lid to some mooncakes I had bought previously. But yeah, I started off with painting some spooky branches. I thought that would be like the easiest thing to start off with because this was my first time painting. When I've painted in the past, I mostly used watercolors. It's just what I had on hand growing up. So doing with acrylic, I was definitely a bit nervous at first, but as I went on, I got more and more confident. I will say the part I struggled with most was probably color matching. I still had a few issues with the colors not being exactly like how they're portrayed in the cartoon, but overall it was okay. It's my first time. I gotta, give myself some grace. After I was done painting, I then went over with a brown pen. I thought brown would be less severe because it's a very cozy show. I didn't want anything to look stark, so brown seemed like the perfect color to use. It also makes the images pop and is a cartoon. I then went in and cut out the shapes very, very carefully. This took actually a super long time, and that's a rock fact. My husband helped me out with this part, but he cut out a ring in acrylic in several parts on our Glowforge. I then went in and taped all those parts together to create a ring. I had bought a wreath off of Michael's, but it was just a little too big for me to use, so he cut out a much smaller version for me, and I'm grateful to him. Okay, I cut out all the shapes, and I probably should have looked into better paper because it's a little flimsy, but that's okay. I'm going to then glue it all onto this ring that we cut out of acrylic. So I began awkwardly laying out all the pumpkin faces around the wreath to make sure that everything looked balanced and that none of the faces were too covered up. I ended up actually taking out one of the pumpkin heads to make sure that it looked right. Okay, so the wreath itself is pretty much done. I feel okay with it. like, it looks cute. Not sure what to do with the branchy bits because they seem kind of flimsy, but we'll see what's up. Next step is to get some of this wreath wire and some felt that I got at Michael's. And I'm going to cut these into strips, glue them to the wire, and kind of make his like streamers that he has in the show. If you've ever seen Over the Garden Wall, he kind of has like this maypole thing going on with his body. So I'm going to make those streamers kind of jut out from behind his head. This guy's name is Enoch, by the way, if you didn't know. When cutting the streamers, I wasn't too focused on making sure that I was neat and tidy. I kind of wanted like a more worn, vintage, scrappy look, if that makes any sense. So I kind of haphazardly cut off the strips, but I think that leads to an overall better effect. After the glue dried, I then went in and bent the wires randomly so that it looked like that they were actually fluttering. So I realized when I have to attach these buggers onto the head, since the head is made out of paper, it's a little flimsy. So I'm going to reinforce it with some styrofoam board that I had on hand. And here it is. My wreath finally fully completed. There are some things I would want to tweak. I might want to stuff a little bit more leaves to kind of make it look a little bit more full and even. And the branches just look a little weak right now, but otherwise I'm pretty happy with it. And Jelly also agrees. Okay, so I made the Over the Garden Wall wreath, and now I want to do a meal inspired by the show as well. If you've seen it, you know very well of potatoes and molasses. The way they do it on the show is mashed potatoes with molasses poured on top. That sounds super gross, so we're gonna do a different rendition of that. I found a recipe by Andrew Zimmern, and it's a bourbon and molasses glazed corned beef. So I got the corned beef, I got the molasses. I didn't have bourbon, but I have rye whiskey, so hopefully that turns out the same. For the potato part of the recipe, I'm also going to be roasting off these little babies with lots of garlic, some lemon, herbs, salt and pepper. Really simple, but super cozy. So let's get cooking. The first very long step of making the corned beef is actually cooking it, and that takes about 2 to 3 hours. We're going to be using a bunch of beef stock to jazz up the flavor. Next, I'm going to be adding a bunch of spices to the mix. So we have bay leaves, mustard seed, peppercorn, and cinnamon. They asked for a cinnamon stick, but I'm just using powdered and maybe a little less than what they're asking for, so it's not too cinnamony, but I'm just gonna dump this in there. Next, I have the corned beef. I got like a 6-pound one, I think. They actually ask for like a 10 to 12 pound, but it's just me and my husband at home, so I went for the smaller version. Dump that in there. I'm gonna need a little bit more water. Okay, that should be good. So now I'm going to be putting this to a boil, and then afterwards I'll cover it and simmer it for 2 to 3 hours. I'm gonna go ahead and make that bourbon molasses glaze while my oven is preheating to broil. The recipe calls for a teaspoon of dry mustard, and when it calls for spices that I don't use regularly, like dry mustard, I like to go to the bulk section and just get around as much as I need. So, teaspoon dry mustard. Then we have a 1/4 cup of molasses. Ooh. And while that drips out, I'm gonna open my bourbon. Scrape out whatever molasses I can. And also get a full cup of brown sugar. There's 1, 2. It's a lot of sugar. Then mix this up a bit. Okay. I have my very teensy piece of corned beef. I'm just gonna pat it dry. It says to pour 1/3 of the glaze on top. So I'm just gonna eyeball this because the amount of glaze I made is probably way more than I need for the size of corned beef that I got. It actually shrunk down quite a bit. There it is. This is me pulling out the roast to occasionally glaze as it broiled. Word of caution, broiling is really hot, and if you live in Los Angeles like I do, where it's always unseasonably warm, it's kind of a pain. Here she is, just out of the oven. I broiled her 3 times, like I would glaze and then broil for 30-40 seconds. Glaze, broil, glaze, broil. It's really sticky. The sugar has made the glaze kind of harden a bit. Like, look at my fork. That's what happens. So it's pretty serious stuff you're working with. But we are going to let this guy rest, roast the potatoes, and then cut into this guy. I'm going to keep it real simple. I have these adorable little potatoes, and this one looks really weird. So I'm gonna cut off his wart, get that out of there. And then I'm going to get a ton of olive oil. If they burst, that's totally fine. In fact, that's probably gonna make for a more flavorful experience. Ton of salt. Might look crazy, but I find that when I season potatoes, they always come out kind of bland. Lots and lots of pepper. I have dried herbs, which probably isn't ideal, but I also want to get rid of it, so a good amount of rosemary, this thyme that I dried, and that I could just kind of sprinkle on very messily. quick side dish to make if you're ever in a time crunch. Last but not least, we have a ton of garlic. I am Korean, so when they ask for a clove, I put in 6. So I like a lot. Then I'm just gonna mix these foods all together. I would usually get in there with my hands, but I just didn't feel like having greasy fingers today. All right, now they're ready for the oven. I actually decided to smash the potatoes just so they'd cook faster. My fatal mistake was that I put in the garlic too soon, and I don't want that to... I don't want the garlic to be too burnt, because that means it's gonna be all bitter. So I'm just gonna smash these. I'm gonna stick them back in the oven for not too much longer. Definitely don't want black garlic bits, but I feel like smashing them is a good idea. Hopefully. And here they are. I think they look pretty good. Garlic isn't too burnt, but they're definitely cooked through. Okay, time to finally cut into this guy. Yeah. This. Yeah, I think it looks really good. It got pretty like candied on the outside, so pretty sure this will taste really good. Here it is, my potatoes and molasses glazed corned beef. Yum. Now for the best part, to actually try it. Gonna get a bit of potato too, so I have like the perfect bite. Mmm. So good. It's really sugary, almost like a glazed ham, but the spices and the corned beef, as well as like the herbs and the potatoes, really complement it well. Tastes just like autumn. Super delicious. I just wanted to give a quick update. I ended up using this extra bit of felt with wire and attached him underneath. Like I folded it in half and tucked him underneath and glued it. And I feel like that gives the wreath like a lot more balance. It was just an extra scrap I had laying around, but I thought it was a good choice. But anyways, that's the end of my video. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye.